Heart of Darkness, page 30. Try to be civil, Marlowe growled a voice, and I knew there was at least one listener awake besides myself. That's the frame story cutting in. I beg your pardon. I forgot the heartache which makes up the rest of the price. And indeed, what does the price matter if the trick be well done? You do your tricks very well. And I didn't do badly either, since I managed not to sink that steamboat on my first trip. It's a wonder to me yet. Imagine a blindfolded man set to drive a van over a bad road. I sweated and shivered over that business considerably, I can tell you. After all, for a seaman to scrape the bottom of the thing that's supposed to float all the time under his care is the unpardonable sin. No one may know of it, but you never forget the thump, eh? A blow on the very heart. You remember it. You dream of it. You wake up at night and think of it years after, and go hot and cold all over. I don't pretend to say that steamboat floated all the time. More than once she had to wade for a bit, with 20 cannibals splashing around and pushing. We'd enlisted some of these chaps on the way for a crew. Fine fellows, cannibals, in their place. They were men one could work with, and I am grateful to them. And after all, they did not eat each other before my face. They had brought along a provision of hippo meat which went rotten and made the mystery of the wilderness stink in my nostrils. Phew, I can sniff it now. I had the manager on board and 3 or 4 pilgrims with their staffs all complete. Sometimes we came upon a station close by the bank, clinging to the skirts of the unknown, and the white men rushing out of a tumble-down hovel with great gestures of joy and surprise and welcome seemed very strange, had the appearance of being held there captive by a spell. The word ivory would ring in the air for a while, and on we went into the silence, along empty reaches, round the still bends, between the high walls of our winding way, reverberating in hollow claps the ponderous beat of the stern wheel. Trees, millions of trees, massive, immense, running up high, and at their foot, hugging the bank against the stream, crept the little begrimed steamboat like a sluggish beetle crawling on the floor of a lofty portico. So a portico is like a giant porch, like what you see on the White House. And imagine that the steamboat feels like a tiny little beetle on the floor of that. That's the difference in scale. It made you feel very small, very lost, and yet it was not altogether depressing, that feeling. After all, if you were small, the grimy beetle crawled on, which was just what you wanted it to do. Where the pilgrims imagined it crawled to, I don't know. To some place where they expected to get something, I bet. For me, it crawled towards Kurtz, exclusively, but when the steam pipe started leaking, we crawled very slow. The reaches opened before us and closed behind, as if the forest stepped leisurely across the water to bar the way for our return. We penetrated deeper and deeper into the heart of darkness. It was very quiet there. At night, sometimes the roll of drums behind the curtain of trees would run up the river and remain sustained faintly, as if hovering in the air high over our heads till the first break of day. Whether it meant war, peace, or prayer, we could not tell. The dawns were heralded by the descent of a chill stillness. The woodcutters slept, their fires burned low. The snapping of a twig would make you start. We were wanderers on a prehistoric earth, on an earth that wore the aspect of an unknown planet. We could have fancied ourselves the first of men taking possession of an accursed inheritance, to be subdued at the cost of profound anguish and excessive toil. But suddenly, as we struggled round a bend, there would be a glimpse of rush walls, of peaked grass roofs, a burst of yells, a whirl of black limbs, a mass of hands clapping, of feet stomping, of bodies swaying, of eyes rolling, under the droop of heavy and motionless foliage. The steamer toiled along slowly on the edge of a black and incomprehensible frenzy. The prehistoric man was cursing us, praying to us, welcoming us. Who could tell? We were cut off from the comprehension of our surroundings. We glided past like phantoms, wondering and secretly appalled, as sane men would be before an enthusiastic outbreak in a madhouse. So here's a place where you could really say that Conrad is racist, because he's saying that the white people are the sane ones and the Africans are the insane in a madhouse. We could not understand because we were too far, and could not remember because we were traveling in a night of the first ages, of those ages that are gone, leaving hardly a sign and no memories. Okay, so you answered 7. Number 8, what is unusual about Marlowe's crew? They are cannibals. Number 9, what does Conrad compare the steamboat to? A sluggish beetle crossing a portico. Number 10, what does Marlowe feel like as they make their way up the river? A wanderer on the prehistoric earth. All right. The earth seemed unearthly. We are accustomed to look upon the shackled form of a conquered monster. But there, There you could look at a thing monstrous and free. Okay, when they talk about the shackled form of the conquered monster, it's like when we look outside and we don't see just a mass of woods and vegetation. We see houses and we see streets and we see roads, and I see a football field going in. That is the shackled or the conquered form of the monster. The monster that we're talking about here is Earth. It's not a person, it's talking about the planet. And we're used to seeing a civilized planet. We're used to seeing an improved or uh, we have mowed our grass, we have trimmed our trees, and so that is an improved or shackled form of the conquered monster. But here, when he's going down the Congo, he's seeing nature as like it's never been touched by human hands. So number 11, the shackled form of a conquered monster is a man-made environment over nature. It was unearthly, and the men were, no, they were not inhuman. Well, that was the worst of it, the suspicion of their not being inhuman. It would come slowly to one. They howled and leapt and spun and made horrid faces, but what thrilled you was just the thought of their humanity, like yours, the thought of your remote kinship with this wild and passionate uproar. Is this a racist statement that he's making here? Is he saying that, he's saying that we're all the same, but he's kind of degrading the people, like what we talked about with the id and the ego and the superego. Everybody's just an id trying to get by. Ugly? Yes, it was ugly enough. But if you were man enough, you would admit to yourself that there was in you just the faintest trace of a response to the terrible frankness of that noise, a dim suspicion of there being a meaning in it which you, so remote from the night of first ages, could comprehend. And why not? The mind of man is capable of anything, because everything is in it, all the past as well as all the future. What was there, after all? But truth stripped of its cloak of time. Let the fool gape and shudder. The man knows and can look on without a wink. But he must at least be as much of a man as these on the shore. He must meet the truth with his own true stuff, with his own inborn strength. Principles won't do. Acquisitions, clothes, pretty rags that would fly off at the first good shake. No, you want a deliberate belief. An appeal to me in this fiendish row, is there? Very well, I hear, I admit. But I have a voice too, and for good or evil, mine is the speech that cannot be silenced. Of course, a fool, what with sheer fright and fine sentiments, is always safe. Who's that grunting? You wonder I didn't go ashore for a howl and a dance? Well, no, I didn't. Fine sentiments, you say. Fine sentiments be hanged. I had no time. I had to mess about with the white lead and strips of woolen blanket, helping to put bandages on those leaky steam pipes, I tell you. I had to watch the steering and circumvent those snags and get the tin pot along by hook or by crook. There was surface truth enough to these things to save a wiser man. Between whiles, I had to look after the savage who was a fireman. He was an improved specimen. He could fire up a vertical boiler. He was there below me, and upon my word, to look at him was as edifying as seeing a dog in a parody of breeches and a feather hat, walking on his hind legs. A few months of training had done for that really fine chap. He squinted at the steam gauge and at the water gauge with an evident effort of intrepidity, and he had filed teeth too, the poor devil, and the wool of his pate shaved into queer patterns, and 3 ornamental scars on each of his cheeks. He ought to have been clapping his hands and stamping his feet on the bank, instead of which he was hard at work, a thrall of strange witchcraft, full of improving knowledge. He was useful because he had been instructed, and what he knew was this, that should the water and the transparent thing disappear, the evil spirit inside the boiler would get angry through the greatness of his thirst and take a terrible vengeance. So he sweated and fired up and watched the glass fearfully, with an impromptu charm made of rags tied to his arm, and a piece of polished bone as big as a watch stuck flatways through his lower lip, while the wooded bank slipped past us slowly. The short noise was left behind, the interminable miles of silence, and we crept on towards Kurtz. But the snags were thick, the water treacherous and shallow. The boiler seemed indeed to have a sulky devil in it, and thus neither that fireman nor I had any time to peer into our creepy thoughts. Okay, so number 12. What makes the fireman an improved specimen? He can run the boiler that makes the boat run. Now, have they been honest with him? No, they've told him that there's a god in the boiler, and if it gets thirsty, we know the boiler will explode. This is a pretty racist statement here to say that the guy is like a dog wearing pants, right? So